Hello, welcome back to the channel. So these starting characters in Star are like pretty underwhelming to say the least, which does make sense since they are the first characters you get, but most people do just kind of abandon them like after they get like any other characters since they are pretty bad, which is kind of sad since it is like the main trio of the game. So I wanted to see like what could be done to maybe make them better since, like I said, they are the core cast. Like they should at least like be good or like decent, you know? So let's start with like the very first character that you get, which is Destruction MC. The problem with Destruction MC is like twofold. One is that they just are very good, but more importantly, we have Remembrance and Harmony MC now, who are very good, and you can only use one form at a time. So it's like, why would you ever use a bad form when you could just use a good one, you know? But looking at the kit itself, they just kind of just do a lot of damage, and that's it. They do have some synergy with like breaking enemies, but nothing really like stands out at all to me. And also, we don't need another break DPS, okay? Like we just buffing like the starting characters is harder than like most other characters because you don't want them to be like too complicated since they are meant to like teach you just the mechanics of the game. So you can't just pull like 10 additional effects and everything and just call it a day. But at the same time, I feel like they are almost like too simple to the point where they're just kind of boring, you know? So I feel like there is some middle ground that we can try to get to. So what I would do is lean way more into like the big hit playstyle with the ultimate, you know, just hitting the enemies with a bat really hard. So I would, 1, increase the scalings across the board because they are pretty low. Then 2, change the ultimate to work kind of like the way Argenti's ultimate works, where there are 2 levels to his ult, you know, the weaker one that does like decent damage, and if you fill the energy up all the way, a second ult does a lot more damage. Then 3, change the talent to when you gain energy, you do 10% more damage, stacking up 10 times. Then I would also change the A2 to be whenever the Trailblazer or an ally attacks, the Trailblazer gains 5 energy. So, you know, you can see a bit of like the synergy there with the talent. Then lastly, I would change the A4 from like 10% defense to 10% attack, so that you can also lean a bit more into just doing a bit more damage. I feel like this makes way more sense for what Destruction MC wants to do, which is just hit enemies with a bat really hard. Now, I do still think you would rather use Harmony or Remembrance MC most of the time, since like they're supports, and supports can fit on way more teams. But I think like a good way to remedy this would be to allow you to use one of the MC's forms per side of the endgame. So like in MOC as an example, you could use Destruction MC on one side and Remembrance MC on the other side, so that you aren't just restricted to only using one. I do think this would also help break as well, so you aren't like so reliant on having Fugue if you want to use Remembrance MC or something on another team. I do think this would at least make them a decent DPS option, especially if we get more supports that synergize with like buffing characters with a lot of energy. And I also think that this is just like way more interesting than just making them another break character. But moving on from the MC, we have March 7th. The main problem with March is she does a lot of things, but she doesn't really do any of those things that well. She can't really sustain well since she can only shield one ally and doesn't really have any sort of emergency sustain. She can follow up, but she doesn't really do any sort of good damage. And freeze as a mechanic also just isn't that good, since 1, on her ultimate it's only a 50% base chance. But also, a lot of enemies can just resist it now, and it does kind of feel like Hoyo doesn't want slows or freezes to be good, which I do kind of understand, because if they were good, it would just trivialize the combat entirely, since the enemies would just not be able to do anything. Which I do also think is why they got rid of it from Divergent Universe and changed it to the whole Memo Sprite thing. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Her traces are also just really bad, and I feel like they should just be a part of her base kit. Like, I don't know, like, why are these traces? Like, it just feels like a waste of a trace slot. Like, why not just have the base freeze chance of her ultimate be 65% instead of having an extra 50% chance on a trace? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So what I would do is, 1, buff her scalings. That's gonna be a thing for basically every character in this video. 2, make her talent damage scale off of her defense instead of her attack, so she can at least sort of do some actual damage, and she doesn't have this like weird hybrid scaling thing that she's got going on. 3, make her traces a part of her base kit, like I said a second ago. 4, make her skill give a small shield to the allies next to whoever she targets, so that she can actually have some sort of like AoE shielding, even if it's not as much as the main target. 5, make her A2 when she uses her ultimate, she gives a shield to her and her allies so that she has some emergency sustain. Then change her A4 to when her talent is triggered, she provides a shield to all allies. So she has some sort of way to sustain without eating up skill points. Kind of like Aventurian, though this would maybe just make her kind of like worse Aventurian, but I don't really know how else you would make her give more shield without just completely changing how her skill works. Then I would change her A6 to be when March or an ally is shielded, increase the base freeze chance of her ultimate by 10%, stacking up 4 times. Freeze is definitely a mechanic that you do need to be like careful with, so this might be like a bit too good. I think it's fine since the freeze is locked behind her ultimate and it's not on her like talent or something. So it's not like you're just gonna be able to have it up all the time, you know. Now even with all these changes, she still would probably be the worst preservation option depending on like how big her numbers are, but I do think it would at least make her a decent option and good with like, you know, certain characters. I could also, you know, talk about her eidolons, and some of them are like not great, but I don't really like talking about eidolons in these videos since one, I don't think that Hoya would ever change them, but more importantly, like a character should not have to have eidolons to be good. They should already just be good at base. But you know, moving on from March, we have the last part of the trio, which is Dan Heng. Of these 3 characters, I do think Dan Heng is probably the best, but I wouldn't exactly call him good. The main problem is one, the lack of characters that can really slow. I believe the only other character that can do it besides Dan Heng is Welt. And even then, Welt like is not that great either, because like, it's like he really wants the enemies to be slowed since he does way more damage to them if they are, to like his talent like needing an ally to trigger it, which I actually don't think is that bad anymore since we do have characters like Remembrance MC or Sunday who are like pretty good single target supports. But even besides that, the fact that it only works for his next attack and that you don't get it for 2 turns is pretty bad. His traces are just not that good and not even original because he has the exact same A2 as Sealy, which like on her is just pretty useless and is also just kind of lazy. Like what was the point of making this? I don't know. So what I would do is 1, increase his scalings like everyone else, then 2, make his talent give the buff for 2 turns instead of just his next attack, so we can actually have some sort of uptime on the buff. You might need to like nerf the numbers on that if we're making it like a permanent buff, but you would have to see. Then change his A2 to when his talent is triggered, increase his crit rate by 20% since he relies on crits to slow enemies from his skill. Then for his A4, I would just remove the 50% chance and make it guaranteed, since it feels like it isn't so strong that you would need to like restrict it entirely. Maybe you could reduce the speed buff to like 50% if you're going to make it permanent, but I do think it would be fine at 20%. Then finally, I would change his A6 to also affect his ultimate and his skill, and not only his basic attack, since you almost never want to basic on him, because most of his damage is from his skill and ultimate. I think just these changes would make him like a decent option against like wind weak enemies and against like bosses and things like that. And you know, if we get more characters that have slows, even though I am kind of doubtful that we will ever get that, I'm gonna be honest, he still would have the problem of being mainly single target, but that is kind of like Hunt's entire identity, so I think that it's fine. And also most of the Hunt characters have that kind of problem. Now I'll be honest, I don't really think that you could make these 3 really good without like a full rework. I do think that these changes would make them like decent options while keeping their role as like tutorial characters, and you know, like it would at least be better than they are now, because right now they are like almost like unusable, I'm gonna be honest. Like they feel like almost Arlen tier, they are just pretty bad. But I don't know, what do you guys think could be done to help these 3 out? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.